The next speaker is Lawrence Abu Hamdan, an artist who uses audio to investigate auditory consciousness and memory in relation to human rights and the law. He describes himself as a forensic listener. His particular piece that he'll be talking about, Walled Unwalled, which is in the Hugh Lane collection, in that he focuses on trials that have hinged on auditory evidence, and in particular the story of survivors of Syria's Sadnaya prison, which is a fairly notorious prison. So, Lawrence?
Yes, hello.
Okay.
How are we doing? I made it. I just was at a kid's birthday party. And so I'm fresh off a ball pit. And I rushed home, and I'm speaking to you now. So, as is the strange and wonderful life of remote presentations, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm not going to actually talk about Walled and Walled. I'm going to talk about an organization I started in 2023 called Earshot. Earshot is a sort of continuation of the way my practice developed, and it turned into an organization because there was a kind of demand that exceeded the scope of what one individual could present, could achieve, and it needed another kind of form. So I'm just now going to just check that you hear the sound. Can you give me a thumbs up if you hear the sound? Good. Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay. Great. So, power resides with those who define what constitute noise. This is no more true than anywhere than it is in one of the noisiest cities in the world, Cairo. And these videos document intervention to the struggle over urban noisescape in the wake of the 2013 military coup. At that time, the military government was cracking down on what remained of the Muslim Brotherhood and wanted to rein in the power of the Friday sermon over its people. Under the auspices of noise control, the topic of the Friday sermon became heavily restricted, and each sheikh was required by law to read from a government-authored script every Friday, 7 pages on a PDF. However, on one Friday in 2014, in open defiance of these new draconian laws, 2 of the 130,000 mosques in the city opted not to give sermons on the government-dictated topic, which is the Prophet's ascension to heaven, but instead on the topic of noise pollution. These 2 sheikhs were determined to have the issue of noise heard, to cut through the sounds of the street and reclaim the power to distinguish between signal and noise. They did so at maximum volume, not only to the congregation inside the mosque, but also to all those passers-by who were barraged by the mosque's loudspeakers broadcasting onto the streets outside. And I chose this work on the loudspeaker libertarianism in Cairo from 2014 as an introduction to today's talk, because the struggle to control and define noise is not only about sound, it is fundamental to the instrumentalization of power and ethics. A power that through our work at Earshot, we are trying to reclaim. Either by giving a fair hearing to those who are relegated to noise, the unheard, or quite literally by listening to what people have defined simply as noise, engaging with what has been relegated to the background, be they the clicks of electromagnetic interference, an echo bouncing off the walls, the whistled sibilance of a voice, or the screech of a hydraulic door breacher. We turn those sort of sonic debris into a space of signification and into a pursuit of justice. I started Earshot in July 2023, and Earshot is the world's first organization to use sound in defense of human rights. We produce not-for-profit audio analysis exclusively in the service of human rights research, journalism, and environmental advocacy. Our mission involves collaborating with international human rights organizations, lawyers, NGOs, journalists, and independent media, activists, grassroots communities, as well as cultural institutions. Earshot has emerged out of a decade of my personal research and collaborations, working on some very high-profile cases, some of which was mentioned in the introduction. One of them was the 2016 investigation into Sydney prison for Amnesty International, the advocacy for which made the prison internationally, at least, the notorious site that it was in the face of its liberation about 3 months ago. Why was sound important in that case is because the prisoners, the detainees, were the 6 that we managed to interview only really had an acoustic experience of that place. They were held in darkness, they were blindfolded as they came in, and they never really saw the prison, they never saw the guards. When the guards came in, they would have to face the walls. Their experience was primarily acoustic, but because of a brutally enforced silence, that acoustic experience was sharpened, it was very acute. And it meant that actually, now it's been liberated and we can see it, the plans and the map of the prison that we could produce in 2016 and what was going on there was extremely accurate. And we can now kind of cross-check that against its liberated form. Another high-profile use of my research prior to Earshot was testimony given at the Asylum and Immigration Tribunal about the unscientific use of accent tests used to police the border in 2011. My PhD, dedicated to the history of forensic audio, was an exercise in thinking about how audio could be used outside the autonomy of police departments and mass surveillance and in the service of vulnerable communities. This is all to say that for years and years I've been paying close attention to the soundtrack of police violence, surveillance technology, and state-sanctioned crimes. And I've watched for years and years how audio has largely been ignored in human rights research and open source journalism. Establishing Earshot is an attempt to fill that gap, to observe events at 48,000 samples per second, rather than the meager 24 to 30 that video offers. To make sure that we're not just limited by what's happening inside the camera's frame or by the silent distance of satellite photography, but that we can hear and that we can be on the ground as the witnesses are. During the first year and a half of our operation, we've been cited in more than 30 major news stories. We've been part of 4 major advocacy campaigns, and we've submitted evidence in 2 jurisdictions. Our social media videos that explain our process have collectively garnered more than 22, as there's currently one going viral, million views. It's safe to say that the need for an organization like Earshot, which at first seemed like a very niche approach, something that wasn't necessarily needed, has been proven. And our ability to provide the sonic missing piece of many jigsaw puzzles around the world has been really encouraging. Not least to say this week, on Monday, when we were directly called out by the Serbian president for the evidence we're presenting on the attack that happened on a silent vigil last Sunday. This is not an out-of-the-box field. It takes a great deal of casework to develop the tools I'm going to show you today. And each case trains us for the next. And although for-profit audio forensic practitioners have existed since the mid-80s, with people like Peter French in the UK and others, when it comes to not-for-profit, witness-focused, community-driven audio forensics, there's a very different approach that I had to establish rather than borrow. CCTV, you see, the aforementioned practitioners have built their expertise on what could be called state media. So that's CCTV, police radios, body cams, wiretaps. While our techniques have been honed on what you could call witness media, mostly to low resolution phones, phone cameras, WhatsApp, voice notes. And these require a wholly different kind of attention. A different set of skills is required to verify, enhance, and unlock their evidentiary potential. More than simply a forensic ear, it requires an ethical one, honed by and for the witnesses to state violations we seek to serve. And in fact, what's interesting about witness media, as opposed to state media, is it actually demands the witness to be front and center of it. It actually corroborates and tries to support witness testimony, rather than simply speak over it with the kind of expertise that you would be afforded if you had more advanced surveillance capacities. The first case we ever published as earshot was the killing of Na el-Merzoug in Paris, in Nanterre, in France. And if there was ever a case that seemed it didn't need an audio intervention, it would be this, because it happened in broad daylight. The police were filmed shooting a boy, unarmed boy, point blank. And yet the soundtrack was the most debated part of this crime. So this is the audio, the 5 seconds before Nael was shot. We enhanced it, and words were revealed. Now, France 2 took our evidence, right, and our enhanced audio, and narrated it, saying that what you can hear is the police officer saying, coupe, coupe, cut the engine, coupe, and Nael screaming back at them, pousse-toi, move out the way. But that is actually very different to the evidence that we found here. When we look at the way the frequencies decay and behave, these spoken phrases, audio analysis quickly reveals that it's impossible that these two statements were spoken from two distinct acoustic positions. You see, the two speakers are more or less the same distance to the camera, but they are speaking from two entirely different places. So one is speaking towards the camera's microphone, right? In which case, the voice being highly directional, you would hear the much greater energy and intensity in the high frequencies, and a much faster decay in the high frequencies, right? But what you would see if I turn around and I'm speaking to you from inside the car away from the microphone, you're going to hear more or less the same boom in the low frequencies, but you're going to see that the highs disappear, right? They disappear, but they decay slower. So those are the two kind of conditions of those two acoustic spaces, right? And they are kind of undeniable. So what we were seeing is that actually the behavior across the frequency spectrum was exactly the same for both those phrases. And we had another angle minutes before where we hear the officers saying, and we hear and see them saying, coupe, coupe, cut the engine. So it's highly likely that the police were the ones both shouting coupe and pousse-toi. But why did the French media say it was Nael shouting pousse-toi? Because it suggested an aggressive behavior. He was portrayed as an aggressor and his death necessary. But more than that, it's because it doesn't make any sense that a police officer leaning on a car with a gun pointed at someone would shout, move over. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's why the media sought to put the words in different people's mouths. But there is something else at work here. Now, both the phrases coupe and pousse-toi are spoken in the informal French. They are not spoken in the formal French. That's very common when police officers speak to ethnic minorities and Arabs in France as a sign of disrespect. But of course, it's also true that you would use the informal when you are talking to someone you know, like your colleague. And so another kind of, sequence of events emerged from our analysis. So basically, if he's saying pousse-toi to his colleague, what is going on there is the colleague's head is actually, they're both in the same place. The colleague's head is more or less right next to the gun. So this started a line of analysis, a line of questions. Was the intention to shoot before or after Nael moved the car revealed by our sound analysis. Did Nail move the car to run through the police, and hurt the police, or run away from a policeman who just announced his intention to shoot him? And though we could not answer this completely, our work was vital in pushing back at the French media's attempt to blame Nail for his own death, and even forced France 2 to retract and apologize for false reporting. So it was a very big step into the field, and really establish how we can reshape this field by listening, paying close attention to the soundtrack, and reshape this event. Later in the same year, we worked with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch to produce an audio analysis of the Israeli attack on a group of 7 journalists in southern Lebanon on the 13th of October in 2023, in which Reuters journalist Issam Abdullah was killed and 6 others were injured. Our main focus was on the sound of the UAV, of the unmanned aerial vehicle, that was audible throughout the 40 minutes of footage prior to the strike. Now, these lines you see here, these undulating lines, are the UAV and its harmonics, its harmonic range. Now, the undulating lines, the reason why they're going up and down is a pitch, so frequency is read from low to high here. And so you can see them rising and falling in pitch. And that tells us one thing. It tells us that there's the Doppler effect at work, right? So with the sound waves compressing and getting higher pitch as the vehicle moves closer toward the recording device, and stretching out again as the UAV moves further away, with the effect of a decreasing pitch. But these lines also told another story. They show that when the sound is at its most intense, which is brightest at its most in this spectrum, so when it's at its brightest, it's very intense, and when it's quiet, you see as it going up here, it's very weak, the line. And that was really interesting because it was working in contradistinction to the pattern of the approach and getting further away. So what am I trying to say is that instead of it getting really loud as it was approaching and then getting quieter as it disappeared, another strange effect was going on. So we could use these 2 bits of information to basically be able to reconstruct the pattern, the flight pattern, because the engine of the UAV is at its rear. It emits sound mostly from its rear, very directly, especially if you're really next to it. It's not if it's just in the atmosphere. Really, if it's coming close to you, you will hear a big difference when the engine is pointing directly at you, which is at its rear. So this misalignment is because of that engine being at the rear, and we sped this up. And basically what you could see is we could use those data points to reconstruct the flight path, right? So it's closest to the camera, it actually reaches its regular pitch, right? So, and then as it turns away and it starts to come back around, it actually gets very quiet, because even though the pitch is rising, it's getting closer, the engine is at its most furthest away point. So that means we could produce a kind of cycle, a circle around the camera, and understand how this UAV was moving in response to the camera. And we could see that it did that cycle 11 times in the 23 minutes before the journalists were killed, before they were hit. And that showed, at the very least, that that specific area was under intensive and very specific surveillance, which strongly suggests the Israeli forces had sufficient information that these were journalists and civilians and not a military target before it ordered the strike against them. And this is the very beginning of the genocide. Of course, some of this seem almost futile to speak about now that we know that there's a systemic attack on journalists. But this was one we could really prove because the area was under intensive surveillance. There was press written both on the side of the car and on the top of the car for the drone to see. Now, a lot of the work we do at Earshot is audio ballistics. We've analyzed dozens of gunshots and detonations from Gaza to Cameroon, from Lebanon to London, and from Athens to Atlanta. Commonly, from cell phone recordings, we're able to say a great deal about the space from which the shooter fired, if they are moving or stationary, how far they are from the camera, and in some instances, the kind of weapon or ammunition used. One of our most heartbreaking investigations of 2024 was the analysis of the murder of Hind Rajab and her family for Al Jazeera fault lines. Now, I'm going to turn this down because it's a really horrible bit of audio. And I just want to warn you about that. It captured the final moments where we hear Layan Hamadi's voice, which is Hind's cousin who was sat next to Hind Rajab in the car as it was being targeted. And in that final moment, we hear 64 gunshots in just 6 seconds. The gunfire in these shots is at a range of 750 to 900 rounds per minute, which exceeds the AK-type rifle, the assault rifle commonly attributed to Hamas, but it is consistent with Israeli-issued weaponry such as the M4 assault rifle or FN mag machine gun on a Macarva tank. Now, when a recording device is in the line of fire, 2 distinct sounds that constitute gunfire are typically audible. First, you have the sound of the bullet, which is traveling at supersonic speeds. It sounds like a whip cracking. It's just it's a small object breaking a sound barrier. Second is the blast of the muzzle, which reaches the recording device at the much slower speed of sound, right? So one supersonic, one sonic speed. But these 2 sounds, as they originate from the same source and they're traveling from known or assumable velocities, you can use the interval between them to estimate the distance between the shooter and the recording device. Now, the vast majority of what the kids are saying is that tanks are next to them and tanks are firing at them. And if we look at the FN machine gun that's on a tank, it has 7.62 bullets, which travel at 840 meters per second. And the muzzle blast from the gun would have been traveling around 340 meters per second, which is the speed of sound at the time of the killing with a temperature of 15 degrees centigrade. These Earshot then would use that to realize that the shooter would have to be positioned within 13 to 24 meters away from the car. And at such proximity, it's not plausible that the shooter would not have known that the car was occupied with civilians, including children, and would have even likely heard those screams of children. Our analysis, in partnership with Forensic Architecture, who extensively mapped every visible exit and entry hole into the vehicle, was able to establish the most likely trajectory analysis of the shooting position of the shooter when it fired those shots. And this is what we estimate as the most likely scenario. Layan was sitting in the middle here, Hind to her right here. Hind here, Layan here. Seconds before Layan, Hamadi, Hind's cousin, is killed, she's heard saying, "They are firing at us, the tank is next to me." They are firing at us, the tank is next to me. It's very clear. In fact, she says it all along, as did Hind. But it took all this investigative work to be able to corroborate her voice, to be able to listen to these children not as the tragic victims of war and its inevitable circumstances, but rather as witnesses with agency to accurately describe the natures of the crimes being perpetrated against them. Crimes that to this day are being hidden and negated. Crimes against a future generation of Palestinians, not a current generation. So the voices of children, being that they are the future of Palestine, are extremely important to corroborate, to give agency. The violence that is done to children, doctors have revealed sniper bullets in children's heads. The violence being done to children is well documented. It is part of a strategy to silence that voice of a future generation. And in that same measure, I'm both proud and ashamed in kind of equal measure that it needs our work to be able to transform these girls from victims to witnesses. It should not need it. We should be able to hear them. They are the most vital voice in this genocide to listen to. The centrality of the voice of the witness is something we try to carry through all of our work. We see our place in open source journalism as one which supports and, if possible, corroborate witness and communities subject to state violence. And that approach is on full display in the final and last case I will show you today. And here, sound is not only the means through which we investigate an incident, sound is the incident in and of itself. And as for a case to qualify for becoming one of the more kind of in-depth pieces of original research that then you might see circulate outside of news reports and in galleries and museums and cultural spaces, for it to qualify as a work, as something we would work on like that, we use sound not only to reconstruct what happened, but really as a device to tell a story. Sound is usually at the center of this story. And during the summer of 2023, the residents of the villages of the occupied Syrian Golan Heights protested against the Israeli occupation on a scale not seen for more than 40 years. These demonstrations were catalyzed by the initiation of an Israeli government project to build 31 turbines, to be the largest in the world, 256 meter high, on the last remaining open space for the occupied Syrians of the Julan. These turbines will produce just 0.6% of Israel's energy needs, and most of them will be built just tens of meters from Julani homes and farms. Now, depending on the wind speed, each turbine generates between 70 to 90 decibels of noise, an intensity of sound equivalent to a busy highway. The acoustic footprint of this wind turbine project will be 16 square kilometers, covering in noise a quarter of the area allocated to the Julanis living in the Julan. This noise pollution will effectively annex this plot of land, rendering it uninhabitable and impeding any future expansion of Julani villages and towns. And that was the results of our research here. After the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Israel seized and occupied 70% of the Golan Heights. Approximately 131,000 people living in 344 villages were forcibly displaced. And just 7,000 remained on their land, today grown to a community of 26,000. This wind farm develops the latest chapter in a protracted series of land and resource expropriation that has beset this community for over half a century. For example, the village of Sahita was partially destroyed in 1967 and subsequently razed to the ground in 1972 to make way for an Israeli military outpost. Many of the 37 families who came from this now vanished village sought land and livelihoods in the very place where these turbines will be built. This wind farm will be the third time in living memory that these Julanis have been dispossessed of their land. Now, to support the Julani community's struggle against this wind turbine project, Earshot collaborated closely with Al-Marsad, a local human rights organization, to develop a digital tool. The tool has two objectives: to contest and to preserve. By using our video game simulation, users, which may be you, who can download it from our website, or stakeholders and their lawyers, can go into their homes and farms most affected by this noise pollution and experience for themselves the force of this sonic annexation. So I'll try now. I don't know, am I running out of time? Can someone give me a time check?
You've got 10 minutes, Lawrence?
Oh, great. Okay, fine. I'll try then to just open this game for you so that you can hear how loud these turbines are. What's going on? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. You could go anytime. Okay, just give me 1 second. Sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing. My mouse has completely disappeared. Ah, there it is. It's back. Ah, great. Okay, just bear with me 1 second. Arrange. Okay. Oops. All right. All right. Oh, why? Oh, how annoying. Excuse me. Sorry. Just give me 1 second. Share desktop 1 or desktop 2? Desktop 1. Great. All right. So here we go. So, do you hear this? And see this? You can move. You hear these field recordings that we've embedded into the landscape. And here you see just how close these turbines are from homes. Hear the sound of this environment, which has been recorded. And here you will now hear what these turbines sound like. So, all right. So, in order to accurately model the propagation of this noise, we made these recordings and measurements in Giath, Germany, which is the only accessible site in Europe with similar 256-meter high turbines. The intensity of the noise was measured across the frequency spectrum at multiple distances, and the wind was on that day 5 knots, which is around the average wind speed in the Julan. There it's about 6 knots. Our measurements show that the wind turbine will be the loudest source of noise in the 400 meters surrounding each one, and that it is clearly audible still at a distance of 1 kilometer. In Giath, Germany, people residing 5 kilometers can hear the wind turbine noise, albeit faintly, but the nearest residents in the Golan Heights will be just 35 meters away. For now, Zivzafa is the only place you can turn on the turbines and hear how they will be affecting this landscape. In the future, it may be the only place where you can turn them off. And it is the only publicly accessible and highly accurate simulation of wind turbine noise to date. And as such, while it primarily employed to support the Julanis, it may also be used in many other contexts who are confronted with similar issues, such as currently in Mexico and in Norway. And the turbines are not the only thing that can be heard in Zivzafa. Julani musician and sound artist Busha Kanjabu Saleh made over 40 field recordings, which we have geolocated and embedded into the digital terrain. In this way, the video game serves as an archive of the vibrant sonic life of the Julani community. From songs and instruments to wildlife and weddings, we've created a digital site where the sonic memories of the Julani community may be preserved before they're rendered inaudible. And I will now kind of move to those sounds. I want to end with four excerpts of sounds, and I just want to listen. We've had a lot of fancy visualizations, and it's important for me to return to the sonic at the end of its purest form. This is the sound of jackals, recorded from right across the border. I don't know if they're in Syria or if they're in what today is de facto Israel. When the Julanis get married, everyone is invited. This is the sound of a wedding invitation, blaring from a megaphone-equipped truck as it passes through the villages and towns, calling everyone to the party. So I guess by extension you're also invited too. This is the other ways in which we show that sound is fundamental to the formation of community. It's an adhesive bond that is collective and relational, and therefore very important to preserve as a kind of act of self-determination.
يا بحر الدامور هيجي عكا وصيدا وصور هيجي يا بحر الدامور هيجي عكا وصيدا وصور لولا شعره ما كان ليل لولا جبينه ما كان نور لولا شعره ما كان ليل لولا جبينه ما كان نور.
When Bushir Kanj Abu Saleh was our local collaborator, was recording the local legend who is a flautist and shepherd, Ibrahim Zain, you hear here. The vet at the time, Hassan al-Safadi, was there. And as Ibrahim played, Hassan spontaneously broke into song, an ode to the coastline on the other side of the mountain. Oh, the Sea of Damour, which excites Akka, Saida, Usur. Today, an intransgressible border separates Damour, Lebanon, from Akka in Palestine. But in this song, these towns are not only connected, the lyrics suggest a constant flow back and forth. Damour in Lebanon, Akka in Palestine, Saida, Usur in Lebanon again, evoking the lapping waves that seamlessly wash over ceasefire lines. It must be a song older than those borders themselves, and it shows it has survived hundreds of years of division and dispossession of our communities. And finally, there was this sound I want to end with. It's a water pump. When we started this project, I asked our Julani collaborator, Bushir, this musician sound artist, what was the first thing that he wanted to record for and to embed on this website for his future generations and to preserve. He thought about it and he said, water pumps. Water pumps, I said. I was taken aback. It wasn't the first sound I'd imagined. I had an overly romanticized idea of the acoustic life of my fellow Druze living in the Golan Heights. But sure enough, the first sound we received from Bushir to integrate into the simulation was the harsh and enveloping noise of a water pump. When he sent the recording, I would skip ahead to see if anything happened. It remained the same throughout. Consistent, its monotony. And though the sound itself remained unchanging, the more I listened to the Joulane and to Joulani activists, the more my relation to this sound transformed. You see, the extraction of the wind was not a new issue, but a new chapter in a story that has included years and years of the theft of their natural resources, the most oppressive of which to date has been a strategy of heavily restricting the Joulanis from accessing and utilizing their local water sources. In order to combat this and maintain access, the Joulanis have built an informal and autonomous network of water infrastructure, including ponds, tanks, lakes, pipelines, and pumps. This sound was one node in that kind of renegade network. This persistent noise represents a small but vital victory in the long-standing battle with the occupation over resource expropriation. And having gone on this entire hour-old journey in making Zifzafa, I can say that this is now my favorite of all the field recordings we embedded into the video game simulation. I no longer hear the monotony of a lifeless machine, but the sound of an unrelenting resistance. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I mean, that's an extraordinary presentation, actually, and to hear how your project, Earshot, can also bear witness to what's going on in the world today or in parts of the world today. So thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you. Would you have a few minutes just to take a few questions? You can't stay for the later, but if there are any questions from the audience, Lawrence won't be able to stay on screen much longer, so if there is a question, if there isn't, okay, not at the moment. We'll pick it all up on the general question and answer, but thank you very much again, Lawrence, for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.